All right. So this one is going to be the most involved video of today's session and maybe even the most involved video of the entire GUIs because here we are talking a bit about event driven programming. So we want that when you press this button, something should happen and it's not as easy to do as it sounds. You see, it's very much like your operating systems. If you type something on your keyboard, let's say a Q, it appears on this screen, but there are a lot of things which are happening in the background for that. So you should look at asynchronous and synchronous events, how your OS handles input and output, and so many of the things to deal with these kinds of asynchronous events. We call them asynchronous because they can happen at literally any time. So how do you check for it? So the point is when I run this application, the point is there is no specified time when you will click on this button. You can click on it, you can press it like any time. So that's what makes it asynchronous, and there should be something looking out for whether this button is pressed or not pressed. So here we need to be a little bit careful. So how do we deal with it? So in order to deal with it, few things that we should keep in mind is now we are going to look at how our classes are interacting. So we have our class over here, some class in which we have written this code, which is my first GUI, and then we have another class's object, which is button, and then you want them to talk to each other. And basically, when you press the button, something should happen. Now, it's also called as event delegation model. So I'm just telling you because if someone asks you to explain what's that, this is what you should be talking about. Okay, how to deal with it now? So there are a few steps that I'll tell you, and we'll just follow those steps one by one. So we have two classes. The first one is my first GUI over here, in which we are creating this button, and then we have this another class button over here, and we want that whenever somebody presses this button, something should be done. So you see, it is very much like treat this my first GUI as a parent. I'm not talking about the technical parent child relationship in Java or inheritance. I'm just trying to give you an analogy here. So say my first GUI is a parent and the button is its child. The point is, child is not always going to live with the parent. There are going to be times when the child will go out maybe to the school or somebody, and now you want that if something happens to this child should come and tell you. You might have seen those videos where people teach their kids about good touch and bad touch, and some if somebody touches them badly, they should come and tell you. That is something that we want here. If something happens to this button, and that's actually called an event. When somebody presses this button, that's a button press event. So whenever that happens, this button should actually come and tell to its parent. But for that, the parent has to make the child trust in them. The parent has to first tell the kid, you say this is a bad touch, and when someone does that, you should come and tell me. I am listening to you. So this my first GUI or this parent, it should tell the button that, well, yes, I am listening to you. So how do you do that? So you make it a listener. This my first GUI class, it has to be made a listener. How do you make it a listener? That is done by implementing an interface which is called action listener. Action listener means if something happens to its button, I am the one who is going to listen to it. So let me show you about this action listener. So we should know where it is. So again, I'll come to the Java documentation, and we want to make our class a listener. So I search for action listener, and this time you will see that this actually is in a different package, which is java.awt.event, and this package has an interface which is called action listener. It also has a super interface, which is event listener. There can be whole lot of different kinds of events, which we will see later. But right now we are only worried about the event associated with a button press, for which you use action listener. And action listener is an interface. So yeah, as of now that. So I'm going to implement this, right? So to make it a listener, you say it implements action listener, and that's going to give you some problem because this action listener, it's not in the swing package, not in the automatically imported lang package. It is in java.awt.event. So let me just import everything from here also, so that I do not see action listener undefined error. And let's see what happens now. I'll just close it. When I run this now, I see a different error. It says my first GUI is not abstract, so and does not override abstract method action performed in action listener. So this action listener interface, right? So what the point is, you have told your child that I'm listening to you, but what will you do after listening to them? So that is defined in this function, which is action performed, and you need to define this function. There is like no way out from it. I'm going to take this function, and you need to define this function in this same class somewhere here. Let's say I'm going to say public void action performed action event e. So what is this function telling you is, when you listen to your child, or when the button is pressed and you listen that the button is pressed, what are you going to do? Right? So let's say for now I am just going to print out something. I am going to say button pressed, and I'm printing it on the console. So whenever a button is pressed, I should see button pressed on the console. So let's see if that works, or are there some more steps? Application runs. When I click on the button, still you see nothing happens. There is no error, syntax error in the code, but this is a logical error. Whatever I want is not happening. So nothing happens when I press this button. So the reason for this is, so we have done two things. You have said that this class my first GUI, it's a listener. So whenever a button is pressed, it's going to listen to that button and it's going to do this particular action, right? But you have not told it which button. You see, when something happens to my kid, and my kid should come and tell me. So I'm associated with my kid. There is a mapping over there, right? It's not that if anything happens to any kid in the world, they should come to me. They can, though, but yeah, still making the point here. So what you need to do is, you'll have to go to this button over here, and this button, you should register with this button that I'm listening to this particular button. So what you need to do is write one more line here saying that b dot add, I think add action listener. Let me check if there is a function like this in the button class, just to ensure that what I'm doing is right. So let's see, go to the JButton class. Okay, come down. I'm checking for add. Yeah, so there is this button which are this function add action listener. It is defined in this button, right? So you can say add action listener, and in this add action listener, you can add an object of type action listener. So what you need to do? You need to say b dot add action listener, and what do you need to pass to this action listener? You see, this line makes our entire code actually go to waste, because when you say b dot add action listener, you need to pass an object of this class, right? An object of my first GUI. But the problem with our code is, right now we have written everything inside main. If you write everything inside main, you are doing everything without creating any object of my first GUI. So we need to resolve that. How do you resolve that? So let me comment this line for now, right? What we want is, things should happen the same way this code is written, it should work. But the point is, we need an object of my first GUI. Not everything should happen in the main. So for that, what you can do is, you can create a constructor of my first GUI. So the point is, whenever you create an object of this class, my first GUI, whatever you write inside this block, that is going to happen. So I am going to shift everything here up here in this constructor. So you see what will that do? When you move everything up into this constructor, right? So there are no data members or member functions here. Everything is being done inside the constructor. So as soon as you make an object of this class, all these things will start happening, right? All you need to do inside the main now is create an object of this class. The moment you do this, it calls the constructor, all of the things over here starts happening. Now you can correct this line and you can say b.add action listener, and what do you want to pass here? An object of my first GUI. How do you pass there? Anyhow, it is the object of my first GUI which is calling this constructor, right? So all you need to do is write a this over here. Right, this over here is an object of my first GUI. I think that's all. We have fixed it. So what should happen now? Whenever you press this button, you should see button pressed. So I am right here in this lab. If you have any questions about understanding this, you can just call me and resolve your query. Java my first GUI and press on this button. You see what happened? The moment I press it, you see a button pressed here. Press it again, it comes again. Press it again, it comes again. So on and so forth. That's all. The point is you can do basically whatever you want here. Let's say I want everything to be GUI. When you press this button pressed should actually come onto your GUI and not on this console. So let's see that in the next video, how we can change our code to accomplish that.